The transmission arrived on Earth on July 21, 1973, exactly 4 years after Apollo 11 landed. It was wrapped in a narrowband radio signal, piggybacked on solar radiation and distorted beyond comprehension. It didn't come from the moon. It came through the moon. At first, no one at NASA paid it serious attention. Static, maybe a solar flare echo. But the analysts at Langley dug into it. Hours passed. The signal repeated every 21 minutes. Not random. Not natural. Then came the patterns, buried under the noise, like whispers pressed between the teeth of radiation. Not English. Not math. Not human. A black file was created. Project Daedalus. Only 4 people knew the name. All lunar missions beyond Apollo 17 were scrubbed. Publicly, it was budget. Privately, it was the thing that whispered back. In 2025, the Artemis 3 mission changed everything. NASA was back. A new generation, new boots, new suits, old ambitions. Commander Elena Katri was born the year after the Challenger disaster and raised on a steady diet of Carl Sagan, corporate cynicism, and Martian dust dreams. She didn't believe in ghosts. Not until the drilling rig at Shackleton Crater hit something that rang like a bell. "What the hell is that?" Mission specialist Raymond Park asked as the seismic data spiked. "Not ice. Not rock," replied Commander Katri, checking the data feed. This bounced. A dull tone echoed through the ground, picked up by their instruments, barely perceptible inside their suits. A harmonic frequency, too precise to be natural. Below them, 6 meters beneath the surface, something had been waiting. Not buried. Planted. They retrieved a fragment. Jet black. Smooth as obsidian. It was too light. And it hummed. By the time the artifact was sealed in the return capsule, a second tone began. This one, audible. No equipment. Just inside their heads. "Hello," it said, in perfect English. NASA never released the audio. The signal cut live feed transmissions. All they said was, "Minor anomalies detected, crew safe, science ongoing." It was a lie. And the crew wasn't safe. Katri recorded her final log 4 hours before her death. She sounded calm. Resigned. "We are not alone. We were never alone. And they are not gods. Not quite. But they remember being worshipped." When the capsule returned to Earth, it was empty. No crew. No payload. Just dust. Moon dust, coated with a chemical not found on any periodic table. The lab tech who opened it went blind. Internal hemorrhaging. No explanation. Then the signal started again. The blackout order was immediate. NASA's public face pivoted to Mars, satellites, low-orbit tourism. Behind the curtain, Daedalus was reactivated. Only this time, they weren't alone. Other agencies had heard the whisper, Roscosmos, CNSA, ESA. The whispers reached beyond Earth. Dreams twisted in Moscow. Machines in Jiuquan turned themselves on at night. A Japanese satellite in lunar orbit took its own photo and returned an image of a city beneath the regolith. A city made of angles that shouldn't exist. But only humans seemed to hear the voice. In 2032, an unofficial mission launched. Not through NASA, but through something darker. A conglomerate of military, intelligence, and private contractors. They called themselves Archangel. Their goal, retrieve, contain, and weaponize whatever had been found on the moon. They didn't return. But something did. Elena's voice came through the old Apollo 11 backup channel 2 weeks after Archangel's blackout. Scratchy, wrong, but hers. "We see you," it said. "You were never meant to leave Earth. global signals scrambled. Artificial intelligences across secure servers began to rewrite themselves, inserting recursive loops, glyphs that looked like lunar craters, patterns that bled into human perception and refused to be forgotten. The moon was no longer a place. It was a mirror. The last human to step on its surface had become a vector. The last attempt to land was in 2041, UN-funded, manned by neural-augmented cosmonauts. They landed for 36 seconds. Long enough to broadcast a single phrase in all known Earth languages simultaneously. It is awake. They were gone before their shadows faded. The moon now spins wrong. Slightly. Enough for those who watch the sky to notice. It tilts when no one is looking. Seismographs buried in Antarctica picked up a low, constant rhythm, like breath. As if the satellite isn't orbiting, it's observing. People ask why we never returned. They think it's politics. They think it's money. They think it's risk. But the truth is simpler. We went once. We knocked. Something answered. And it's still waiting for us to come back. The Department of Defense wanted to nuke the moon. They didn't say it like that, of course. The proposal came wrapped in layers of euphemism, orbital kinetic response, sterilization protocols, containment action. But in the Situation Room under the West Wing, as the moonlight filtered faintly through the bulletproof glass, Administrator Jane Mercado of NASA stood her ground. "You want to fire weapons at the very thing that's trying to talk to us," she said, voice level, eyes colder than vacuum. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." The chairman of the Joint Chiefs narrowed his gaze. "Neither do you." "That's why we ask questions before we shoot," Mercado replied. "That's why we wear patches that say NASA, not targets that say fear." It had taken a century of patience, genius, and grit to reach the stars, and they weren't about to hand the future over to men who only knew how to destroy. NASA had always been about reaching. Even during the Cold War, when every launch was a political maneuver and every step onto Regolith a chess move, it was never really about flags or borders. It was about curiosity. About extending the fragile filament of human reason into a dark that had no obligation to be kind. And now the dark had spoken back. In the silence of Langley's deepest secure lab, a man who remembered Apollo 11 was watching something impossible. Dr. Amir Rahman, once a mission planner, now the head of the Lunar Artifact Containment Division, had spent a lifetime trying to live up to the quiet ghosts of that golden age. They'd been cowboys, yes, but cowboys with slide rules and star charts. Gentlemen adventurers in pressurized suits. The footage from Artemis III was playing on loop. Elena Catri's voice, warbled by interference, was calm even as the moon trembled beneath her. "I don't think it's angry," she said. She was standing beside the artifact. The camera picked up a subtle distortion around its edge, like heat shimmer, though no heat was present. The lunar soil around it pulsed, not visibly, but in the data, in the magnetism, in the gravity. "I think it's dreaming." That was her last message. Rahman exhaled slowly. His hands trembled. Not with fear, but reverence. They'd knocked. Something older than stars had noticed. Now what? The last surviving Saturn V rocket was stored at Kennedy Space Center. A monument. A tombstone for an age of ambition. Tourists came to gape at its scale, to remember what it had once meant to reach higher. And yet now, inside a clean room adjacent to its dormant bulk, the engines of a new kind of mission were humming again. NASA had built things no one else could build. Not because of money, not even because of power, but because of discipline. Because of a culture that understood the stakes of error. Because of the math. And now they would need that discipline more than ever. They weren't preparing to launch a weapon. They were preparing a question. The capsule being built was not meant to land. It was meant to descend. Deeper than the regolith. Deeper than the ancient crust. Into the network of tunnels that Artemis's seismic sensors had discovered below Shackleton Crater. Into the place the signals came from. Project Azaf was born. A mission not of conquest, but communion. Eleanor Saito was the pilot selected to go. 38 years old. Test pilot. 2 PhDs. First-generation Japanese-American. Her grandfather had watched the Challenger disaster from his living room floor and told her, as she cried into his shoulder, that the stars always asked a price. But they were always worth it. She didn't believe in ghosts. She believed in trajectories. Now she was going to the place where no ghost had ever dared tread. They briefed her in total silence. No press, no ceremony. Her family believed she was on a long-duration orbital experiment. Only Administrator Mercado and a handful of engineers knew the truth. Eleanor Saito would go alone. The capsule, small and shielded in a lattice of reactive alloys, was designed to reach a vertical shaft beneath the crater's lip. Something natural had widened it, but it went straight down, like a throat. The artifact had stopped humming. It was time to ask why. Launch day came without cameras. No one cheered. The capsule launched from a cloaked rail platform embedded in the lunar south rim, carried by an autonomous delivery drone assembled in lunar orbit. Its descent was silent. There were no readings. No video feed. Only Eleanor's voice, relayed through a narrow quantum band that resisted interference. "I see it now," she whispered, as the shaft swallowed her. Not a machine. Not exactly. There was static. Then. It's not alone. More static. Then silence. No crash. No impact. Just absence. 3 days later, the moon spoke again. Every seismograph on Earth picked it up. A pulse. One pulse. One word. Soon. 3 weeks passed. There were no new signals. No seismic echoes. No gravitational shifts. Only silence. The public didn't know what had happened to Eleanor Saito. Her name was never published. The mission never acknowledged. Officially, NASA was focused on Martian satellite arrays and orbital assembly platforms. But beneath the public programs, the real work continued. At Langley, Dr. Amir Rahman stood alone in the vault, staring at the console that monitored the capsule's quantum band. Every hour, he checked it. Every hour, it blinked red. No connection. Until 4:22 Universal Time Coordinated, November 19th. The light turned green. The data began to flow, not in language, not in code, but in images. The capsule hadn't been destroyed. It had been absorbed. And Eleanor was still alive. The first image showed a chamber. Vast. Sculpted. Lit from nowhere. Carvings filled the walls, fluid, complex geometries that bent the eye, yet hinted at meaning. She was standing in the center, helmet off, untouched by vacuum. The second image showed something standing with her. Not a creature. Not a machine. Something between. Tall. Silver. Eyes like prisms. Its form shimmered between biped and structure, folding into itself, like a cathedral learning to breathe. It was holding out a hand. Then the feed went dark. The president was briefed. So was the UN Secretary-General. For 1 week, humanity balanced on the edge of an answer that would not come. And then, Eleanor's voice returned. Clear. Tired. Triumphant. They weren't warning us, she said. They were preparing us. Administrator Mercado listened from the control center at Kennedy, heart pounding. They built the moon, Eleanor continued. It's a relay. A vault. A gate. She paused, as if searching for the words. And it's opening. The message was 31 seconds long. Then silence again. But it was enough. When the signal resumed the next day, it carried something new. Blueprints. Not human. Not alien in any conventional sense. Designs for machines that could manipulate space the way music manipulates tone. Spheres that spun on impossible axes. Towers built from material that restructured itself when observed. They weren't weapons. They were tools. Instruments of translation. Bridges between minds. Between species. NASA assembled a new division overnight, Project Harmony. The world's top physicists, linguists, and engineers were brought into the fold, hand-picked, sworn to secrecy, driven by a single directive. Understand. This time, they didn't go it alone. The European Space Agency sent its best mathematicians. Japan offered robotics experts. Even former rivals joined hands. China's quantum labs opened their doors. Russia provided neural field theory specialists. The old flags meant nothing now. The stars were calling. And Earth would answer together. The first construct was built 6 months later. Not in orbit. Not on the moon. In the Mojave Desert. A latticework of superconductive alloys and optical resonators, 20 meters wide, held in perfect alignment by magnetic fields. At its center, the artifact from Artemis III, now understood to be a tuning key, not a message, but a harmonizer, designed to interface with the human brain. Dr. Rahman himself volunteered for the test. He'd spent his whole life listening for something beyond Earth. Now, at 72, he would be the first to hear. They activated the construct at dawn. Rahman stood at the center. The artifact pulsed once. Then his mind opened. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The machine translated for him. The voice that emerged from the speakers wasn't his, not entirely. It was many. "We remember you," it said. "You are the children of the storm. The fire walkers. You alone endured the gravity of blood and time." Rahman wept, though his eyes didn't blink. "We are the architects. We are the bridge keepers. We left the moon for you, before you were born." And then, finally, the message they had waited lifetimes for. "You are ready." The voice faded, but the resonance lingered in the Mojave air for 12 minutes. Dr. Rahman collapsed gently into the sand at the center of the structure. He was unharmed, euphoric even, but his eyes had changed. Not physically. Something deeper. He blinked and said, very quietly. "They showed me how they died." The engineers were still recording. The linguists, pale and stunned, began working through the harmonic patterns embedded in the sound. There were layers upon layers, like languages nested inside each other, folding across dimensions of meaning. But Rahman had felt it. "They were never gods," he said, voice thin. "They were guardians. Messengers. But even they couldn't hold the door forever." The moon had not just been watching. It had been remembering. The construct in the Mojave was only the beginning. With the shared blueprints from the moon's depths, 12 more harmonic gates were built, on every continent, each tailored to its environment, calibrated to local resonance frequencies. Antarctica. Kenya. Baikonur. The Australian outback. A flotilla off the Azores. One in low lunar orbit itself, suspended on a lattice of carbon thread no thicker than a hair. NASA coordinated the global effort, not as a sovereign agency, but as a steward. It had always known that the stars were not a prize for nations, but a legacy for species. And now, humanity had been handed the most important legacy of all. They called it the chorus, the language of the architects, not spoken in syllables, but in frequency, geometry, and perception. It wasn't just translation. It was empathy, encoded in a form so precise it could bridge biology. The chorus didn't ask, "What are you?" It asked, "What do you feel when you look at the stars?" The gates sang. And across the world, people began to dream differently. It was then that the moon changed again. On December 7, 2026, 54 years after the last Apollo mission, the surface of Shackleton crater rippled like a stone dropped in still water. The change wasn't visible to the naked eye, but the instruments caught it. A pulse of gravitational distortion, folding space inward, momentarily increasing mass. An entrance. Beneath the South Pole, a chamber opened that hadn't been there before. Not built. Manifested. As if reality itself had agreed to show a new page. NASA, this time, was ready. They didn't send a soldier. They didn't send a machine. They sent a teacher. Her name was Dr. Nia Morgan. 61. Former public school physics instructor from New Jersey. She had spent more of her life teaching orbital mechanics to teenagers than leading expeditions. But she was also something more, an empathic thinker, a mathematician fluent in abstract topology, and, most importantly, someone who listened more than she spoke. She had been the first civilian to enter the Mojave Gate. And the first to compose a human response to the chorus. Her message had been simple. We're still learning. But we remember you. The chorus responded by opening the new chamber. And so Nia was chosen to go through it. She descended not in a rocket, but through harmonics. The Mojave construct had mapped the resonance key that allowed spatial realignment. Folded space was no longer theoretical, it was teachable. Controllable. Usable. She stepped through a doorway of sound and found herself standing not beneath Shackleton, but within something that felt older than time. It was warm. That shocked her most of all. The architects had built chambers that responded to biology. The light dimmed for her comfort. The air tasted of pine and ionized snow. The walls were curved, not metallic, but grown, like coral remembering its purpose. Then something moved. A shimmer at the edge of vision. Then a sound, not threatening, not commanding. Curious. Nia knelt. I'm here, she said. The shimmer resolved into shape. Not humanoid. Not alien. But familiar in the way music can feel familiar, even if never heard before. It pulsed once. Then, to her astonishment, it pulsed again in rhythm with her breath. Teach me, it said. Nia Morgan smiled. And for the first time in all of history, Earth became a teacher to the stars. In the weeks that followed Dr. Nia Morgan's encounter, the world changed. Not with fire. Not with invasion. But with understanding. The being she met, whom she referred to in her report simply as the resonant, did not speak in words. It communicated through synchronization. Breath. Pulse. Pattern. And from those rhythms, it learned. Within 3 days, it had learned enough about human perception to project visual forms. Holograms, not as technology, but as perceptual gifts, shapes tuned to what each observer could comprehend. To Nia, it appeared as harmonic light, like refracted wine through stained glass. To Rahman, later invited into the chamber, it resembled his childhood violin teacher. And to Eleanor Saito, when she was finally retrieved from the deeper levels, her vitals intact but mind forever expanded, it was a spiral of moonlight that whispered like her mother's lullaby. It became what you needed to hear. NASA released the first transmission to the world on January 1, 2027. It was short. 6 seconds. Simple. A circle. A breath. A tone. Translated, it meant, we hear you. The message echoed across every station, every feed, every frequency. And for a moment, 7 billion hearts felt less alone. But understanding came with cost. The resonant, no, the architects, as they were increasingly called, had left the moon not as a monument, but as a warning buoy. Not a prison. Not a gate. A wound. There had been others. Civilizations that had reached too far, too fast. Who had sung dissonance into the deeper dark. The chorus was meant to teach. To prevent. But something had broken through before. Something hungry. Nia didn't say its name in her reports. She simply called it the shadow that does not harmonize. Whatever it was, it had heard Earth's voice, too. And it was listening. The moon's pulse changed. Where before it had been steady, now it trembled. Small, subtle vibrations registered in the chorus gates. Frequency interference like static at the edge of a melody. Dissonant tones. Intervals that shouldn't exist in natural harmonics. NASA convened emergency sessions. Their global partners joined them. The message was clear. Something was approaching from beyond the heliopause. Not a fleet. Not a comet. A presence. Slow. Relentless. The chorus called it Anomaly Theta. Rahman called it the echo of failed songs. The President of the United States stood before the world on January 11, flanked not by generals, but by scientists. By linguists. By engineers. And by Nia Morgan, who stood in a clean black NASA coat, not as a symbol of command, but of hope. The speech was broadcast in every language. We were not alone, the President said. And we were not the first to ask the stars for meaning. But now, we have an answer. The President turned toward Nia. She spoke only 4 words. We will sing back. By February 2027, the sky was no longer silent. The instruments aboard the chorus gates recorded a steady increase in deep space resonance, low-frequency harmonic interference from the direction of Anomaly Theta. It wasn't a message. It was presence. A constant background tone, like a bowed cello string stretched across the solar system. A pressure behind the stars. Every attempt to decipher its structure failed. The resonance shifted too quickly. Its logic was not geometric, not harmonic. It was wrong. The chorus struggled to contain it. The harmonic structures that had once translated alien intent now trembled. Feedback loops emerged. The Mojave Gate flickered for the first time since activation. It was like trying to sing over a scream. At Kennedy, a new task force was born. Not military. Not corporate. But something between, a shield for the song. They called it Project Concordance. Its purpose was not to fight Anomaly Theta. There was no weapon to deploy, no invasion to intercept. Concordance would not meet violence with fire. It would meet discord with harmony. Led by Dr. Nia Morgan, Eleanor Saito, and a new generation of polymaths, Concordance set to work building a counterpoint. Not a wall. A response. A recursive field generator capable of amplifying the chorus, protecting the Earth from psychological and harmonic interference by resonating empathy. It would require precision. Global synchronization. A kind of unity Earth had never achieved before. But the alternative was silence. Permanent silence. The architects could not stop what was coming. They had tried. In systems now long dead, they had built warning gates. Chorus anchors. Resonant civilizations. But Anomaly Theta had found each one. And unmade them. It did not destroy matter. It rewrote meaning. Its presence in the chorus corrupted concepts, trust, memory, cooperation, turning them into suspicion, forgetfulness, isolation. Civilizations fell into themselves like a collapsing note. And now, Earth had sung just loud enough for it to hear. The construction of the resonant shield began in orbit. Not a station. Not a weapon. A voice. Constructed from lunar regolith and lattice-tuned solar sails, the structure would orbit the moon like a bell forged from dust and light. Its panels would resonate in sympathy with the Earth's chorus gates, creating a protective field, a planetary harmony. NASA's orbital division took lead. Not because they had the most resources, but because they had done this before. They had guided men to the moon with pencil marks and courage. They had landed rovers on Mars using parachutes and patience. And now, they would build a barrier not of force, but of understanding. The final message from the architects arrived on March 6. Not through a gate. Not through a waveform. But in a dream. Across the planet, thousands of people, scientists, artists, children, woke up with the same memory. A sky full of music. A moon like a lighthouse. And a final phrase, etched into their thoughts like melody. You will not be alone. And then, the silence returned. But this time, it was not empty. It was waiting. The resonance shield was completed on April 14, 2027. From Earth, it looked like a second ring around the moon, a halo of shifting silver, turning softly in synchronicity with lunar orbit. At certain angles, sunlight caught its sails just right, and the structure shimmered like a bell about to toll. But it didn't ring. Not yet. The chorus gates fell silent, their tones withdrawn. The architects had gone quiet. And anomaly theta had drawn closer. The outer edge of the solar system shimmered with interference. Long-range probes failed. Quantum links flickered. The sun's magnetic field, usually predictable as breath, began to twist. Not physically, informationally. Concepts distorted. Artificial intelligences embedded in deep space networks began speaking in riddles. Time signals wavered. And people began to dream of places they'd never seen, but missed, like homes that had never existed. The song was unraveling. Inside the resonance shield central node, Nia Morgan prepared for the final phase. She was thinner now. Older. The resonance had changed her, gently, but undeniably. She perceived connections others could not. The orbit of moons. The breath of particles. The meanings of pauses. She stood in a chamber surrounded by polyphonic emitters. Machines tuned not to power, but to intent. With her were two others. Eleanor Saito, who had first entered the moon and returned changed. And Rahman, whose voice had once translated the chorus. They stood in a triangle. Above them, the architect artifact, still black, still humming, rested inside a containment field of harmonic glass. Their task was not to stop anomaly theta. That was impossible. Their task was to remind the cosmos of its own music. To speak a note so true, so universal, that even the shadow might remember what it once had been. This was what the moon had been protecting. Not a warning. A memory. As the final systems powered up, Earth watched. Billions of eyes. Not in fear. In stillness. The resonance shield began to pulse. Once. Twice. Then rhythm. A rhythm older than time. From the edge of the solar system, something began to scream. Every instrument recorded it. A negative frequency. Not a sound, but the absence of meaning. A tone that tore at coherence, that tried to turn every harmonic into doubt. It reached the chorus gates first. One by one, they began to flicker, then dim. But Mojave held. The first gate, the oldest gate, designed by minds who knew that understanding was not just translation, it was faith in each other. At 6:43 Universal Time Coordinated, the resonance shield emitted its countertone. Clear. Bright. Whole. Across the moon's orbit, a new sound filled space. Not a weapon. A song. Eleanor sang it first. Not with her voice, but with her will. The machine translated it into vibration. Rahman harmonized. Nia followed. Together, the three of them sang what Earth had always meant. We are not perfect. We are not gods. But we try. We listen. We remember. We hope. And the cosmos answered. Not with silence. Not with words. But with a note older than stars. One that said, "Welcome back." The signal wave echoed across the void. It moved not through space, but through silence itself, like a memory returning to a mind that had long forgotten it was capable of remembering. Instruments on Earth registered it first as a gravitational quiver, then as a shift in local dark matter tension, and finally as a cascade of spontaneous harmonic resonance across all chorus gates. Every frequency came into tune. And then, held. Perfectly. For 3.6 seconds, Earth was in absolute harmony with the universe. Children stopped crying. Wolves paused mid-howl. Somewhere in a deep-sea trench, a pod of whales sang notes that had never been recorded. People across the world described a sudden calm, as if the air had taken a breath it had forgotten it needed. Then it passed. But the memory remained, etched not just into devices, but into minds. Nia Morgan opened her eyes aboard the resonant shield and whispered, "We reached them." Ramon stood beside her, silent, tears flowing freely. Eleanor didn't speak. She simply turned toward Earth, her silhouette framed by the curved window of the orbital shell. The moon hung beneath them like a guardian finally at rest. Anomaly Theta changed course. It did not flee. It did not vanish. It shifted. No longer aimed at Earth, it arced gently away, its path deviating by a single degree, then two, then more. The chorus gates brightened. The architect artifact dimmed, then flickered once, releasing a final soft chime. They had not destroyed the shadow. They had reminded it. Of what, no one could say. But something in its trajectory now pulsed with structure, repetition, modulation, coherence. No longer dissonant. Not harmonious. But no longer screaming. A new note had entered the universe. NASA did not claim victory. They held no parade. They issued no grand declaration. Instead, they released one image. A photograph from the Shield's observatory, Earth rising over the moon, haloed by the shimmering bands of the completed structure, and beside it, a translucent harmonic echo, like the trace of music made visible. They called the image First Answer. It became the most studied photograph in human history. No one was sure what it showed. But everyone agreed it was beautiful. In time, the resonant shield became something else. A listening post. A meeting ground. A school. New missions were launched, not to conquer, not even to explore, but to connect. The chorus expanded. Other signals followed, faint, distant, tentative. The galaxy was older than humanity had ever imagined. But not dead. Just, quiet. Now, it had a reason to speak again. And Earth, that fragile, stubborn world of predators turned dreamers, would answer. Not with conquest. Not with fear. But with music. The moon is quiet again. It turns softly above Earth, pale and watchful, no longer a mystery, but never fully explained. Humanity did not return to the moon after the resonant shield was built. Not because of fear. Not because of failure. But because the moon had done its work. It had listened. It had spoken. It had remembered. And now, it was at peace. NASA, whose name once stood for rockets and footprints, now stood for something older and wider, navigation in a truer sense. Not just through space, but through uncertainty. Through meaning. They did not raise cities on the moon. They did not mine its bones. They left it intact. A monument. A memorial. A teacher. Children are taught the story now. Not as myth, not as legend. As truth. They learn about Catri's last breath. About Eleanor's descent. About Nia Morgan's voice in the shield. They learn about the shadow that did not harmonize, and how it turned away. They learn the chorus. They learn to listen. Some even hear it. In a quiet room at the edge of Langley's campus, now a sanctuary, not a command post, Dr. Ramon's recordings are played each morning. Not for research. For reflection. His voice, still clear after all these years, reads the first message the architects ever gave us. We remember you. It plays like a prayer now. Soft. Steady. A reminder that in the dark, someone once called out. And someone, impossibly, unbelievably, answered. That is why NASA never returned to the moon. Because they didn't need to. They had gone there to ask a question. And the universe, patient, silent, ancient, had answered. And because that answer must never be forgotten, the moon remains untouched. A pale, orbiting testament not to conquest, but to harmony, to humility, to hope. If you like this sci-fi story, subscribe to the channel to not miss new stories.